Good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and along with my colleague, the Reverend Zack, Nyein, who serves as Senior Associate Rector, we are together honored to welcome you all to the forum, where each week we hold sacred conversations about the things that matter. And I know that the topic this morning is something that matters to so many of you watching. Over the past few months, we've been praying for Ukraine, and today we are truly honored to be joined by leaders from the Anglican Church in Ukraine and in Poland about how they have been responding to this terrible war. We have with us Christina Lashenko. She is a warden of Christ Church in Kyiv itself. We also have with us Peter Schwenchitsky and the Reverend David Brown, who are leaders of the Anglican Church in Poland. We are so honored to have all three of you with us this morning. Thanks for being here. Christina, I wonder if we can start with you. Can you tell us what is the situation on the ground like in Kyiv today, and how are you all as Anglicans and as people holding up?
Thank you for this opportunity. Those who will arrive to Kyiv by train, the only route, by the way, to enter the country these days, might be surprised observing almost normal life in the streets. Many shops are open, restaurants are open, theaters and cinemas continue performances, internet and mobile communication are operational, which is the proof. Summer beaches along the Dnipro River are full of holidaymakers. City parks on weekends see lots of people, including families with children. But this misleadingly peaceful picture changes immediately when the siren sound comes together with the threat of missile or rocket shelling. Having heard the siren, not all people rush into the bunkers, although bunkers are available almost everywhere, in shopping malls, in theaters, cinemas, offices, even in kindergartens. Underground metro stations stay open at night as shelters. Siren sounds are rather scary. A lot of big and small cities had been targeted with missiles this summer in Ukraine. Those who follow the news might recollect Vinnytsia, Lviv, Zhytomyr, Kyiv on the right bank of the Dnipro River, and Mykolaiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Kryvyi Rih, Nikopol on the left bank. This is not, of course, exhaustive list of those cities which were targeted with missiles. And by the way, these are not small cities. They have population between 500,000 and 1 million people. Kyiv is almost 3 million people of population. And lots of civilians were killed. The official figure is more than 6,000 of population who were killed, and almost 8,000 were wounded. But of course, these are not exact figures because we do not have the full information. And many of the attacked cities are very far away from the front line. And people who live in these cities, they hoped that the probability of being targeted there was negligible. Some days ago, during a day of August 21st, when Ukraine marked its Independence Day, we heard 8 sirens here in Kyiv. Each of them lasted each airstrike alarm lasted between 1 hour and 20 minutes. And then if you go some 6 kilometers away from Kyiv, in western or northern direction along the highway, you can see burnt tanks and burnt armored vehicles near ruined satellite cities around Kyiv, which are smaller towns, most middle-class towns. After combats there in March, the landmines remained hidden, and sometimes they detonate unexpectedly. And despite extensive demining operations around Kiev after deoccupation in late March, the authorities, even now, even in summer, keep warning about danger to step aside from the main highways. Those small towns, which are like only 6-7 kilometers away from Kiev, they suffered much because of combats in winter, and now people hectically restore the houses preparing to severe Ukrainian winter. Later, I will tell about our help to these cities. The mood in Kiev has changed from shock, despair, and reckless determination in the first month of war to readiness to work patiently for the sake of the victory. Now, many people who fled in the first month of the war from Kiev, they come back and try to work or to volunteer in all possible aspects. The mood across Ukraine is similar everywhere. We are in danger everywhere in Ukraine, irrespectively how far you are from the front line. 100 kilometers or 1,300 kilometers. 1,300 kilometers, you are at the border with Hungary. The Russians are actively shelling big cities and smaller towns in Western Ukraine equally to the Eastern Ukraine. Big industrial cities in the left bank of the Dnipro River are targeted more often, of course. But in case of accident in the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which is occupied and shelled by Russians for some time now, the whole Ukraine and many neighborhood countries in Europe will be heavily polluted with the nuclear waste. And I'm afraid we all are in one boat in terms of the threat of nuclear terrorism of the Russians. This only strengthens our resoluteness to fight for our existence and to survive, and at the end of the day, to prevail. Being surrounded by unseen threats, people call to God. Our Anglican congregation is now almost wholly scattered around the world, in the USA, in India, in Poland, in Germany, in the UK, France, Hungary, and the list of countries that hosted people from our congregation is not exhaustive. We are only 6 members from the electoral roll left out from the Christchurch, Kiev, from our congregation. And before the war, we additionally had between 20 and 30 occasional visitors additionally to the electoral roll members. Nevertheless, we continue to pray. And on Sunday, some of us come to St. Catherine's Church to participate in the German Lutheran service of the word. Just like Anglican congregation, the Lutherans have no priest now because the German pastor was advised to leave for Germany in early February. They also have neither pastor nor experts now and lead the services in Ukrainian. And we join them for this services in Ukrainian because we know we also like Anglican congregation, but we do not have expats as of the moment, which is quite understandable. But people gradually are coming back to Kiev, although I do not think that many of our fellow parishioners will come back by the end of September or maybe even October. And maybe, hopefully in November, more people will return depending on the situation with the shellings and at the scene of war. During our joint worships with Lutherans, we pray together for the lives of Ukrainian people, for the support to Ukrainian army, for the liberation of Ukraine. And also we pray for those who are prisoners of war, who are in the occupied territories, or innocent victims of intensive shellings. Our special prayers are about those who lost their homes. Official data are that we have around 14 million of displaced people, and we pray for all of them who are displaced either internally in Ukraine or outside the country. In this situation, where each of us individually can only pray collectively, we may contribute to bigger efforts like volunteering or support of the direct actors involved into the action. And as an Anglican congregation, we contribute, since we are not numerous, we contribute to the Lutheran charity providing aid to people from Moshchun community in Kiev region, which is like 30 kilometers from Kiev. They were liberated from Russian invasion in mid-March, and 80% of housing in the village is destroyed. And now people there, they left actually without everything. They lack everything, beginning with clothes, with food, with utensils, and of course they need construction materials to restore the houses. And we provide charity for them. These days, we are to decide on everyday basis what is right, what we should do right now to stand for what we believe is right. At least I feel it rather clearly. For us all here in Ukraine, it is quite understandable that Russians will not stop. They want to destroy Ukrainians physically. And for us, fighting against them is a matter of survival, not just a matter of political concepts like sovereignty or territorial integrity. They simply want our land because they want to destroy us and bring their people here. It is that simple in 21st century. Actually, that is what they had been doing in Crimea during last 8 years. They illegally occupied it and started substituting population. And that's why we believe that we have to fight them if we want to survive. We have no other way out. Although we did not want to start the war, of course. And now we are in a very difficult situation as a nation. And please pray for us and for our survival. Thank you.
Christina, thank you so much. We certainly do hold you in our prayers, and I'm so inspired and in awe of your courage and resilience and the resoluteness of all those who have decided to stay or who must stay in Ukraine for whatever reason. And I'm so impressed by the calmness that you bring in speaking about such a horrifying situation. Please know of our love and of our prayers, and we look forward to hearing more later in the conversation about how we specifically can be involved and be supportive and helpful from afar. I want to turn to our friends in Poland now and just get a sense of how has the Anglican Church specifically responded to the war in Ukraine, both in Kyiv and in Poland, and in what ways has your Christian faith motivated you to help the suffering and the refugee?
Thank you so much, and thank you for arranging this. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk to you. I think Peter, I'm going to ask in a minute if he will actually say something about specifically how the Anglican Church has actually helped in this in these last few months. But the thing which impresses me most is how individuals within the church family, but also throughout Poland, individuals are helping in so many, many different ways. Our congregation is fairly small. Perhaps we have 150 or so people associated with the Church of England here in Poland. Many of them belong to other organizations, Rotary, Masonry, other organizations of all sorts. And those are very involved themselves in doing things. For example, the Rotary group, of which I'm a part, has bought an ambulance to help in Ukraine. And we have given about $10,000 to a new music school for Ukrainians here in Warsaw to help with them buying instruments. But many individuals are accommodating Ukrainians who have escaped from the country. Many individuals are helping in other ways to support Ukrainians. And it's really a great kaleidoscope of different ways in which people are helping as individuals through other organizations, as well as through the church. One can give many anecdotes of different tragedies which people are going through. But I think that 6 months on from this terrible invasion, there's a real sense of exhaustion by many people who have been accommodating people who've been helping in all sorts of ways. And also in Poland, where the numbers are a bit unsure, but probably 2.5 million people have come out of Ukraine and have come in and settled for some time in Poland. And the pressure on services is enormous, especially in a city like Warsaw, where the population has increased by perhaps 20%. And the pressure on schools, health services, transport, housing is enormous. And of course, we have cost of living rises here, as you do in America and as in so many of the Western countries. But the cost of housing and other services has increased enormously, simply because there are so many more people who need help and support and accommodation and so on. But perhaps Peter would talk about what the church has been doing, because Peter actually retired fairly early on this year or the end of last year, but seems to have been fully employed and doing different things. So we're so grateful to Peter for all that he's done.
Thank you, David. Yes, I don't want to say the fortunate timing, but I retired at the end of last year, so was able to devote more time to assisting the church and the refugees who came here. First, I wanted to have just a comment on what Christina said, because to put it in the context that I see of the psychological warfare and terrorism being engaged in right now by the Russian military. If you put it in the context of 9/11, it was a terrible, horrible event, a tragedy. It lasted one day, was not repeated. What we're seeing here and what the Ukrainians are seeing is this missiles that are sent out. They're not necessarily guided. And they, as I understand it, the Ukrainians all have alarms in their phones. They have a weather alarm saying a thunderstorm is coming. In this case, it's that the missile is coming and you have to run for shelter, but no one knows where it is. So it covers a very large region, and this can happen several times a day, as Christina said. And this has been going on for 6 months now. And then when you go into, it's not like going into the New York subway, but going into the Kiev metro, it's dug very, very deep. It was dug as also nuclear shelters in case of nuclear bombs. So you're going down 2 flights of enormous escalators to get down to the bottom of something like that. So it's it can be a very frightening experience in terms of what is going on. And it's part of this psychological warfare that has been going on. And we see this in terms of the refugees and the displaced persons who have come to Poland, of which there have been millions. And we are only able to help really what our help is a drop in the bucket. But the first help that was done by the Anglican Church here was simply taking in the Ukraine refugees who arrived into people's homes. And there was a tremendous outpouring, not just of our church members, but of really the entire nation in terms of taking people into those accommodations, because the government was not prepared to take in and the millions. And if you can imagine, again, the Midtown bus terminal, the way of the flows of people coming out of it, a lot of them just carrying shopping bags because they had to travel so quickly. That's the same thing as to what was happening here. That flow has really stopped. Now it's slowed down, but as David said, millions of those people are still here. What we have also done in addition to that then is try to relieve some of the burden on Poland itself by assisting the refugees who wanted to then go to the United Kingdom. And so we worked with various organizations that were, the UK had a matching program. You have to get a visa to go to the UK, and we were working with organizations that were matching those people. And then we were providing them with temporary accommodation here in Warsaw while they were waiting for the UK government to issue those visas. In that sense, the church has been able to accommodate several thousand nights of accommodation for people who are then have gone on. We've also used some of the funds to help with the air travel and the transportation costs of getting to the UK. And doing that, working with various groups, as David said, such as evangelical churches, which have been set up here with other aid organizations, with the Rotary clubs. Also want to say that as part of this tremendous outpouring, when you can imagine another view of Madison Square Garden laid out entirely on its floor space with 1,000 camp beds and that's what we see in the refugee centers here. And very much what we wanted to do was to take people out of those refugee centers where they had, you could say, heat, light, food, but no privacy. Very, you could say, difficult accommodations for many families, and move them into more private accommodations. And that's a lot of what our aid has been focused on. As I said, working with many other people doing the same thing. So we haven't answered the second part of your question, Zach, but we'll get back to that.
Well, I certainly.
One other thing which we have done is that we have given grants to people, to those offering accommodation, and to Ukrainians themselves, so that every month they can apply for a small grant, $200 to $300 a month, which will help them with basic needs which they have.
Thanks so much. I think we can certainly see the profound witness that your lives are embodying right now through the amazing work and welcome and in ministry that you've described. So thank you. It's very evident.
Thank you both, Peter and David. I'm wondering now if any of you who would like can talk about your place within the Church of England's diocese in Europe, which encompasses both the Anglican Church in Ukraine and the Anglican Church in Poland, and also has congregations in Russia. Do you communicate with those congregations? And can you speak a little bit about how the larger diocese is helping you in the work you're doing to support the refugees and those who are displaced?
Yes, the diocese in Europe had a Lent fund appeal to raise money to help with Ukrainians. And they did this alongside the United Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. And they have been willing to give us grants to help work which we're doing. So we're very, very grateful indeed for that. And certainly many of the chaplaincies throughout Europe have been doing different things. They've been collecting food and resources, equipment, clothes, and so on for people from Ukraine, and that I know that has been much appreciated indeed. There is a chaplaincy, of course, in Russia, based in Moscow, and that has continued to have its weekday services and its Sunday services, and that is still continuing. And the chaplain there and his wife and the congregation, with numbers probably on a Sunday, normally about 70 or 80, are continuing. And some of their people have had to leave Russia to move back to America or to the United Kingdom because of their firms move them out. But they are continuing to witness there and to support the people there. And I think that's an important thing to remember, that people need support individually. They're feeling exhausted. They've given a lot. It's not always easy looking after people from another country and who are with great needs and with terrible trauma. And so we need to give a lot of time to just listen to people, I think. And I'm sure that, that Christina would say that's the same, in Ukraine, that people, and also, of course, people's needs, which they had before the invasion, still continue. And there will be people in Ukraine, in Russia, in Poland, who are going through all sorts of traumas which were before the war. And those people do not need to be forgotten. And so the sort of pastoral needs were there already and have been increased, not only because of the Ukrainians, but just because of the pressure which people have been under. Sorry for that rather long answer, please forgive me.
Thank you, David. And I wonder, Christine and Peter and David, how can Christians in the United States specifically help those affected by the war in Ukraine? And what do you most need from us? We see a lot of different kinds of organizations and initiatives here on our end of things, but I wonder, from your perspective, what is most needed?
Christina, I'll try to answer. That's a difficult question. Obviously, we need your prayers, but I also think that we are not going to see an end to the war soon, unfortunately. And I think that what really is needed is solidarity, and for that solidarity to continue. There has been a tremendous support from the United States for Ukraine, and that support we hope very much will continue. If I could put it in a hopeful historical context, back when Karol Wojtyła became Pope in 1978, he made his first pilgrimage and visit to Poland in 1979. And it was a historic event. Why was it a historic event? For many reasons, but one of the reasons was that for the 2 weeks that he was here, the government effectively stopped functioning, and the Catholic Church took over the entire organization of the trip, the security for the trip, everything else. And people then had, there was an epiphany, realized that the government and the communism was not really needed. That then led the next year to the founding of Solidarity in 1981, went too far, the imposition of martial law. But 10 years later, after that visit of the Pope, we had the fall of communism in 1989. So it ultimately was the germ that resulted in that succeeding. And that solidarity now, in terms of the support for Ukraine, I think will also take a very long time, but the germ is there, the support is there. If the spirit can continue in terms of the support and for all of the Ukrainians, I think that ultimately it will mean very, very much for us. we have to remember that 3 days prior to the invasion, Vladimir Putin gave his justification for the invasion. He said one of those justifications was that he believed that Ukraine was part of the Russian spiritual space and needed to be brought back into the Russian fold. We don't agree, but it will take an awful lot of solidarity and prayer to make sure to prove him wrong. Thank you.
May I add?
Please do,
May I add?
Christina. Please do.
Thank you. I would like to join to Peter and say that, of course, I agree that solidarity is a very precious thing. And in our case, the solidarity of American people could be, or to say people of the Anglican communion could be even rather material, so to say. I mean that the United States government had made a lot of expensive commitments, so to say, to help Ukraine. And at some point, ordinary people who are all taxpayers may ask, why should we pay for these expensive commitments of our government? So I agree with what Peter said brilliantly, and I would suggest to you to do some practical things. Try to learn something about Ukraine. Your prayers are very precious, but try to learn something. Try to understand why Putin is lying about our joint spirit or something else, which is total lie. And try to understand who we are, for what we are fighting, etc. So this requires an effort from people. The effort is not that simple for people. And I think when this effort is done and you understand your brother Christians who are far away, who are fighting, but you know what they are doing, in what they believe, because I think Christians in this or that denomination, they still are Christians, and Ukraine is Christian by 70% of population are Christian. So try and understand us, and this will be a good backup to your solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you both, Christina and Peter. Go ahead, David.
I'm going to just say a great thank you to you all and to the people of the United States, because in a sense, you're on a different continent and you are apart from Europe, and yet, you know, your support has been absolutely marvelous, governmental and as individuals. And so we're most grateful, you know, indeed. So thank you very, very much indeed for that commitment. I think one of the things is that we need flexibility. You know, we can't say to you, please, we need money for this, that, or the other specifically, because everything changes so quickly. And we're most grateful for your help financially, but you know, it needs to be a bit open, you know, but, you know, of course, what we do need is to make sure that we communicate and tell you what we are doing. And so hopefully we will meet again at some stage in this forum and to be able to report back. And hopefully, I mean, it'd be wonderful if next time we met, peace could have come to Ukraine, but that does not look very likely, I'm afraid, at this time. And of course, the people in Poland are very concerned because, I mean, I know some people, Polish people, are just very concerned that Poland is next because, you know, in the past, Russia has, well, other nations all around have walked through Poland. And so a lot of people are here in Poland, are very concerned about the future and about their own security and their own safety.
We certainly are praying for a peaceful outcome sooner rather than later. And for those of you who are viewing this conversation, we're putting in the chat a link if you'd like to make a financial donation to the work that the Anglican Church in Poland is doing to help refugees from Ukraine. So if you want to offer that tangible form of help, that link will be in the chat. We have a few minutes left for those of you viewing this conversation live who would like to offer a question or comment for our guests. You can do that by putting those questions or comments in the live chat function of YouTube and the comments function of Facebook. You can also email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. That's pthompson@stbarts.org. And those of you who are watching this conversation in person here at St. Bart's, my colleague Manny Rodriguez-Leach is downstairs and can collect your written questions as well. While we're waiting for those questions, I wonder if any of you would like to reflect on how your personal faith has held up during this time of atrocity. David spoke about the fact that caregivers are going through their own things and need to be taken care of. And I wonder if you all can talk about kind of the state of your faith and how that has been challenged and how it's also been nurtured during this time.
Thank you once again, Peter. I think that we actually are blessed because we have 10 guests from Ukraine living in our house now. So on a day-to-day basis, and one of them is a child who is very severely handicapped. And we are able to see the love of his parents for that child, the care that they give to him, and basically it's the ability that expression of God's love that we see every day face to face that we did not have before is a blessing for me that just did not exist before. And so what this aid that we're able to give is provide these opportunities that otherwise would not have come to us. We had another situation where we were helping a family from Kharkiv, and they arrived in a car with their 2 children, the father, 2 daughters, grandmother, and sister-in-law. The mother had been killed the week before by a Russian missile as she was driving down the street that struck her. I sat down with the father. The first thing he did, you could tell he was still in shock. He pulled out a picture of the remnants of this jumble of metal that was all that was left of the car after it was shelled. But then the 4-year-old daughter talked about her mother and how she is now in heaven, and seeing the faith of the 4-year-old child, and it was just incredible, and it was just so sad what she has to live through, and being able to get a family like that then to start a new life because they wanted to get away from the war, and to see that was that. So in a sense, you feel like the Good Samaritan in terms of what we're doing. So that's fairly obvious. The one other thing I wanted to say though was that there's also in 1 Peter chapter 2, Peter writes, by doing good you silence the ignorance of foolish persons. And so I think that's also the best way to counter the lies that we hear is simply through these acts of goodness. And it's so surprising then, you could say, for those who have started this war, that they're so surprised that there are so many acts of goodness, not just ours, but of yours and all around the world that are being done, that hopefully are much stronger and in terms of the voice that we hear than the lies that they propagate. Thank you.
Can I just emphasize what Peter says, who said it very well indeed. I mean, we believe that God is love, and those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. And we do see so many, many acts of goodness and love and sacrifice by people. And we're very humbled, I think, by people like Peter and Susan, who are giving their home over to host people in need and who need support at this time. But I would say that we do need to very often tell people that they can't do any more, because sometimes people feel guilty that they're not helping. They'd say, I'd love to help, but I've got other things to do. And I think we need to remember that God has given us our different vocations in life. Christina to look after her husband and her daughter, and that is our first responsibility. That is our great calling, to look after those very close to us. And we also have to do our work and our jobs. We also have to look after and love ourselves. And so sometimes, the most helpful thing you can say to people is, you're doing enough. Please, don't feel guilty. Other people are able to help in this way. Please continue to do what you're doing in your life here and now, and to show people that they need to be kind and gentle and loving with themselves.
Christina, did you have anything to add?
Yes, I've been thinking about what I've heard from Peter and from Father David, and it came across my mind that I think for all Kievans, if not to say Ukrainians, we have seen the God's miracle this winter. Because according to all the forecasts of all the intelligences around Western countries, Ukraine had a chance to stand against only during 3 days. Within 3 days, we were expected to be occupied fully. And in Kiev, the situation was extremely grave. The authorities here in Kiev, they had no hope. And when the president of Ukraine rejected to evacuate and to escape, actually, there were no hope in those days. And the enemies were very close. And suddenly, somehow, the miracle happened. We do not know how that happened. How our territorial defense, our limited armed forces, which were concentrated near Kiev, because we did not expect the attack on Kiev. We expected for the attack in the east, and Kiev did not have too much troops, enough troops before the invasion. So the miracle somehow happened, and it happened later. I understood why it happened. It happened because all people, they showed huge unity, they showed huge solidarity, and just like one will. Our community, Anglican community, on the first day of the war, we announced the 5-day marathon, prayer marathon. Each hour, we prayed for our soldiers, we prayed for those who resisted, for territorial defense, for volunteers who started to provide supplies to the front line, because everything happened too quickly, too unexpectedly. Everything was in shortage, in deficiency here. And eventually, in a week, we saw a miracle that we were not occupied after a week. And that gave us this impetus to fight further and to defend our country. And we continue to pray today that let there be more miracles like that shown by God. I believe this is the God's love. God gave us this suffering, this test, so to say, to send us a signal that we should change. But at the same time, he helped us to resist and to survive. I think this is the God's wisdom in all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Well, we've heard a lot about the many short-term effects of this conflict. You've spoken about how Christ Church in Kyiv has really been scattered across the world. Many have left. There's a great deal of uncertainty and unknown in this situation right now. I'm wondering what you think might be the long-term future effects of this conflict, and what role do you expect the church to play?
I think that we should start from the role of the church, because in this situation, we witness how people, they turn to God. Those who had not been thinking about God in their life before the conflict, having seen all these terrible things, having escaped the war, evacuation, or those who are coming from army service or going to the front line, all these people, they turn to God. And I think the role of religion, of faith, and consequently the role of church, irrespectively of the denomination of the church, in Ukrainian society will grow. Although I should say that people in Ukraine, they are in majority, they are rather active churchgoers. I mean Christians, especially from western parts of Ukraine. And I think this will grow even everywhere. That's why we should think how to become more open to people, to show more hospitality to those who are coming, to provide comfort for them, and to give hope, especially in this war-torn country like we are.
Peter or David, any reflections on future effects of this conflict or predictions about how the church might continue to play a role? If not, that's okay.
Not really, except that to remember that every person, every human being is a child of God. And, you know, that's true of the Russian people as well as the people in Ukraine. And it's terribly difficult to remember this always when, you know, we are in these terrible times of conflict. But we do have to remember that, and that, you know, the Russian soldiers have parents and families who love them and care for them. And very often I fear that the individual military and so on are not, they're controlled by their governments, and they are individuals who need love and to know that God loves them, you know, from wherever they come, and to hopefully come to know God's love and to open themselves to that love so that they can become peacemakers rather than be controlled by outside forces on them.
I think we'd love to long-term develop outreach ministries such as you have there at St. Bart's, looking at your website. Unfortunately, the Emmanuel Church here in Warsaw was struck by war. The church, actually a church was built in 1935. It was destroyed in September of 1939 by bombing at the beginning of World War II and never rebuilt. So there is no church building that we have here. We also now have worship services at the Evangelical Reformed Church, very kindly making its facility available to us. So the building actually is in a sense not a blessing. You could say it's good we don't have a building because the cost of maintaining it would probably overwhelm us. But having a beautiful place to worship is very important also for bringing people together. I think that we hope to develop the same kind of outreach that you could say in the examples of what you have. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time and have to leave it there. I really appreciate each one of you for being with us this morning. Christina, Peter, and David, thank you for all that you are doing in the midst of such terror and trouble in Ukraine, for standing witness to the power and love of Jesus Christ in this world. We are so grateful for your time with us this morning and so grateful for all the work that you are doing. Thank you also to those of you who are joining us, whether in person here at St. Bart's or online. We hope you'll stick around and join us for worship in just a few minutes at 11 a.m. We'll be back in person next week for the forum for reflections on labor as we observe Labor Day weekend. Thank you all for joining us. And once again, Peter, David, Christina, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.